Today, we will, of course, be looking at pivotal issues in Nigeria that has to do with insurgency and, of course, resource control. It's a very disturbing one. But in the face of insecurity in Nigeria, security forces insist a nexus exists between the activities of bandits and illegal mining. Now, we have more details in this intro package. Take a listen.
Northern Nigeria is known for its agricultural resources, including crops like millet, sorghum, and groundnuts. However, in recent years, there have been discussions and concerns about the impact of resource extraction, including mining and oil exploration. In the case of Zamfara State in the northwest, the illegal mining of huge gold deposits has been identified as one of the underlying causes of the region's conflict. Security officials insist that a strong and glaring nexus has been established between the activities of bandits and illicit mining. The northeastern part of Nigeria, especially with states such as Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa, has faced various challenges grappling with the Boko Haram insurgency, including insurgency and issues related to natural resource extraction. This extremist group has been active since the early 2000s with its stronghold in the northeastern region. The conflict has led to significant humanitarian crises, displacing numerous people and causing widespread instability. The surge in illegal mining underscores systemic deficiencies within Nigeria's governance framework, exposing vulnerabilities in socioeconomic and institutional structures. It underscores regional socioeconomic challenges, notably the insufficient handling of poverty and deficient state service provision. Specifically, the youth, due to limited income avenues, become targets for recruitment by sponsors of illegal mining operations. Furthermore, the engagement of foreign corporations in illicit mining activities signifies a breach of security governance. To tackle banditry and illegal mining in Nigeria, a comprehensive strategy is essential. This involves enhancing security measures through law enforcement, intelligence gathering, and community involvement to disrupt criminal networks. Simultaneously, regulating the mining sector and enforcing laws can curb illegal activities while offering legal alternatives in collaboration with local communities. Economic development initiatives like job creation and infrastructure investment can address underlying socioeconomic factors. Lastly, fostering dialogue among government bodies, security agencies, communities, and mining stakeholders is crucial to establish a unified approach in resolving these intricate issues.
Protect the voters, protect.
Abdul Mahmood, security analyst from London, the United Kingdom, and also Gbemisola Animashao, associate professor, Center for Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ilorin, joins me on the show to shed more light on this development. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for having
Good
me.
evening.
All right, I'd like to start off with you, Abdul. An estimated 80% of mining in northwest region of Nigeria is carried out illegally, according to some reports, and on an artisanal basis by local population. Now, this particular mining, of large untapped mineral deposits in the area, especially gold, which has strategic importance and also economic value, is at the core of many of this community violence. Now, in your opinion, what do you have on this one?
Well, thank you for having me on. Good evening, Nigerians, and Happy New Year. I'm particularly worried about the framing of the discourse this evening. One, at a certain level, it suggests that the entire conflict that we have in the entire region, northern region of Nigeria, stem from illegal mining or illegal extraction of natural resources in that region of our country. I do not think it's entirely correct. What I think we should do is decompartmentalize what I considered as centers of conflicts around the northern region of Nigeria. If you look at Kebbi, Zamfara, yes, it is true that the conflicts around control and ownership of natural resources, more particularly among the Fulanis and Hausa ethnic communities of Zamfara. But when you go to the North Central, where we may have to zero on in the course of our discussion here, considering what has happened or what has happened in Plateau State, in Plateau State in the recent weeks. We may have to dovetail our argument around attempt by ethnic nationality communities to seek control and ownership of land outside their regions of provenance, or provenance. That's at another level. Two, what I think is also happening as well, and I'm sure the prof will shed light to this, is what I consider as non-securitization of land, natural resources, food system in our country as assets of national security. If the nation state has taken steps to securitize land, securitize communities, securitize human beings that live in these communities, vast ungoverned spaces that we have now wouldn't have existed in the first place. So for me, we are dealing at a certain level, fight over control and ownership of natural resources, particularly around ethnic communities in the Northwest, and also internecine conflict over ownership and control of land in the North Central that has nothing much to do with natural resources, but who owns the land and who should live in this land. I think that is what we see playing out in Plateau State, and to a large extent in Taraba State, where we are not hearing much of the conflict, but we know conflicts are going on in that section of northeast region of Nigeria. And if you look at Yobe, where we've had sordid tales, in the past 24 hours, and in Borno, nothing much has been heard in Borno over the Christmas. We know that the struggle by Boko Haram bandits and terrorists, is still going on in that section of the northeast region. So for me, we're dealing with a problematic that the nation state has refused to place its handle on. And this problematic gets to do with the non-securitization of lives and property in our country.
I'd like to go to you, Professor Anima Shanwa, on this one. Now, the conflict, of course, has been on the increase at about, say, since 2014, spreading across states like Kaduna, Katsina, Kebbi, and of course, you have Plateau State and even Zamfara State. Now, over 5,000 people have been killed unfortunately, as a result of this impasse. But it seems unabated. Now, Abdul has given some sort of insight into the root causes and also sort of segmentalized the whole thing. But I would like to know your own take on the root cause and, of course, what you think are the core reasons for what we see in this particular regions.
Well, thank you very much. Compliments of the season. I will build on what you have said. It will be unfair and it will be inaccurate to use one lens to look at what is happening in northern Nigeria. I say this because in the northeast, you have the epicenter of insurgency and violent extremism. In the northwest, you have criminality, the people I call sovereign or alternative sovereigns have emerged, I reject the description of anywhere as ungoverned because these places are actually governed, but illicitly governed by alternative sovereigns who have actually replaced the state in these places, So you have that in that part of the country. Come to the North Central, you have, in fact, I describe the place as Nigeria's Middle East because there you have the third convergence of criminality, insurgency, and conflict. Each peaking at different levels in different states across the North Central. So that is why I'm a student of the local anyway, so I will always insist on the need to go for depth instead of length in this case, so that you will be able to have a textured and a targeted recommendation, textured analysis and targeted recommendation at the end of the day. So talking about root causes, it's important to put this within, different phases of time in specific places. Uh, there's a kind of consensus that insurgency peaked, in 2009 in the Northeast. Now, what we have described as banditry, or which I see as class criminality and nothing else, again, in the last 6 years, took its own life and its own identity, in the Northwest. But something happened around 2020, 2021, and that was when there was a kind of fusion between the bandits, as you have termed them, and the violent extremists coming together, which unfortunately changed the dynamics and the direction of violent extremism in the country. Because what we now saw was a kind of fusion and consolidation, between these anti-state elements, for a generic word to describe them. Because one thing that binds them together is that they are all, they stand diametrically opposed to the interests of democracy and the peace and stability of the Nigerian state, each driven by different reasons. So a fair discourse should actually be driven or targeted at putting these issues, disaggregating these issues along the lines or the spaces of their, occurrence. And that is why, yes, insurgency, as we say, is still rife in the country, although it has entered another phase. And it's important we should not take it for granted. It was unfortunate that the outgoing government said it had a technical defeat, when in actual fact, there was just a mutation of the conflict. So it's important for this government to realize the fact that what we have today in different parts of the country is the emergence of those I call alternative sovereigns that the locals have found one way or the other to live with. That means the sovereignty of the Nigerian state today is limited, unfortunately, within its own borders, because it is not in every territory of the country that the Nigerian state is fully governing.
Anyway, let's look at okay. Let's of course bring it down into neat bits. Let's look at the efforts of what the government. Okay, so let's look at the efforts of the government, in some states. For instance, the government actually did ban artisanal gold mining in Zamfara State and across the region, and the deployment of soldiers was also done to enforce this ban. Now, let's look at the effect of some of these efforts by the government to control, this particular activity. How effective and efficient will you say it has been in terms of results? I'd like to go to you, Abdul.
Yes, my colleague on the other side has raised an important point, and I like the phrase that he coined, that Professor Julian Cohen, described the whole question of alternative sovereign. And I think it's important we highlight what it means and how it exists and its effect on our nation state. I will come to your question, but I need to explain this. Once a nation state loses its affect, its love that citizen has for it, that love moves to alternative centers of power. That alternative center of power could be contesting centers of power against the nation state. And that's what we see in certain communities in northern Nigeria, and also in the southeast of Nigeria. Two, the nation state has become so weak that it cannot even secure itself. If it's a strong, secure nation state, artisanal wouldn't have seized land and be mining. If it's a strong and secure nation state, bandits would not have run over communities in north-central Nigeria, seized control and ownership, imposed taxes, as we see in about 8 local governments in Niger State at the moment. If it's a strong nation state, we won't have alternative groups flying national flags that are not flying flags that are not Nigerian flags. Two, the question of alternative sovereign also dovetails into question about control and ownership of land and resources. And it gets to do with the way ownership of resources is arranged in our country. If gold that is in my land in Bokos, for example, in Plateau State, why does ownership and control and mining fall within the province of power of the federal government? So you see, we will have locals here who pay affection to those local miners rather than security agents who are on the ground to ensure that natural resources are not mined, willy-nilly, rather than, subject their affectation and also allegiance to national security forces who are on the ground to protect the security architecture of the nation state around these communities. So true, consistent with what Prof has said, we are dealing with a problem of alternative sovereign. We have a president who has strengthened his office as a president, and we have a nation state that is weak. And that's the paradox that we are dealing with. If we do not resolve that paradox, the Nigerian nation state cannot put a handle on its own internal security. That's my position.
So, I mean, if I'm to get you correctly, you're saying that the problem or part of the problem has to do with the institutional structure because by law, the federal government has control over the mineral resources. And hence,
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. That is my position.
Yes.
That's my position.
Okay.
So we're dealing with institutional problem. We're doing structural problem. We're dealing with a state that is weak. We're dealing with a state that has personalized the power of the president. We have a president that is more secure than the nation state. We saw the number of cars that was, the numbers of cars that were in the convoy of President Bola Tinubu, for example, a few days ago in Lagos. Those numbers of cars with security agents that are driving those cars should be at the center of conflict in Zamfara State, not in Lagos.
So you're suggesting that the power be decentralized?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I would like to know, of course, Professor Animashaun's reaction to this.
Yeah, I'm fully in support of what he has said. And my own argument has been the fact that, we have a state that does not have the capacity to fully govern its territory. And that has been since 1999. If you look at what they call security votes and most of these spending on security, I mean, both the known and on the unknown, in terms of meetings with bandits, concessions made to them, you will discover that most of these things are only targeted towards preserving the powers or protecting whoever is the governor of the state or the president and commander-in-chief. They care less or they are not aware of the need to be able to project power beyond Aso Rock and beyond the government houses. As a result of that, you have situations across the country where you have the governor, the city, fully protected, and the further you move away from the government house, the less secured you are, the weaker the state is. Because the state itself does not even care to project its power beyond its own immediate confines. So I fully agree with him about the need not only to decentralize power, but to ensure that governance is separated from the state. I mean, let me explain this. This is what I mean. The state should exercise its power to fully govern its entire territory. What we have today is more and more powers being spent in decorating the state, preserving the state, which is defined as who occupies the seat of power, unfortunately. Meanwhile, governance is simply being able to conduct the conduct of other people. look around Nigeria today, the Nigerian state cannot be seen to be controlling or conducting the conduct of everyone within its territory. And this goes to the questions of development, being present in people's lives, being fully present in all areas that fall within your geographical zone as a nation state. So it's important for the state to deploy governance as a response to ensure that its presence is felt in every nook and cranny of the country. And that is why I agree with him that we need to decentralize power, but in operationalizing that decentralization, it should be driven by development and being seen to be in control of your entire territorial space.
I mean, let's move away from the.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We understand that, okay, it's been established that there is an institutional angle to this being a fault, but it's also been alleged that illegal miners often front for politically connected individuals who collaborate with foreign nationals and also corporations to sell the gold. Now, the mineral, according to some report, it's been alleged smuggled to countries like Dubai through neighboring countries like Niger and Togo, for sales. And at the end of the day, they rake in a lot of profit. We've seen cases where some people, even of foreign, descent, are arrested but are released. Later, once very strong and influential political figures or key figures in society, puts forward their influence. Now, looking at all of this, it appears to be a very coordinated network of very powerful individuals. What do we say? Yes, we know that there is institutional fault in all of this, but what do we say concerning this network? Is it that the government or the institutions responsible to ensure that issues like this don't occur are handicapped or overwhelmed? I'd like to direct it to you, Abdul.
Okay. Again, you're right. We are dealing with collusion here. Collusion of
very powerful collusion.
Yeah, of collusion of very powerful personages of power and individuals that are connected to power who are non-state actors. And I want to draw from an example, and I'm sure a lot of us saw it in the papers a few days ago. There was a report of 20 million naira stolen from the office of the Deputy Governor of Zamfara State. And when the papers reported it, they said there were bags of monies brought by 3 mining companies in Zamfara State. That it was a sting operation, I repeat, to test the level of collusion of the Deputy State Governor on mining activities in the state. The Deputy Governor, according to the report, was not aware that 3 bags were dropped in his office. The security operatives who were aware took away the 3 bags and shared the monies among themselves. What the reports highlight is this, that there is a high level of collusion at the highest level of government in our country, at the subnational level, at the level of government houses, at the level of offices of commissioners of ministries, in the states, at the level of director generals of MDAs in the state. And it worries me because year in, year out, after 4-year cycle of elections, we elect criminals into power in our country whose only objective is to loot the state blind. And when they don't loot the state blind, they collude with individuals who do not take Nigeria seriously. And it takes me to another problematic that the famous poet raised a few years ago, that we deal with these problems perennially because we have a generation of Nigerian rulers or ruiners, who do not take Nigeria seriously. So if we have elected officials who take our country seriously, their responsibility is to ensure that there are consequences for misconduct, there are consequences for those who go outside the bounds of law, and there are implications for rule of law in our society. But that is not the case. So we have a set of rulers, generation of leaders who are only interested in enriching themselves, and at the risk of making this point, making poverty out of our country. Imagine the level of revenue we lose from these mining feeds in Zamfara State. the level of revenues that we'll lose at the end of the day in the mining fees of Zamfara State. Some of these states go cap in hand to the federal government in Abuja, begging for money from FAC, FAC coffers, while they sit on huge revenue pots in our country. Rather than have this money come into the state revenue stream, these revenues go into private pockets. And again, too, we're also dealing with collusion of our security agencies. If you look at those mining sites, you find security officers standing at akimbo, looking at criminals mining and extracting our natural resources. It is because their hands, their body and their souls are neck deep in the extractive activities taking place in our country. And that does not augur well for our country.
All right, gentlemen, at this point, we, of course, will go on a quick break. When we return, we'll be looking at the way forward and also the effort of the current administration in Nigeria in tackling this problem. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining us, this is Secure the Continent, and we have been looking at the nexus between insecurity in northern Nigeria and illegal mining. We'll still have on the show Abdul Mahmood, a security analyst from London, that's the United Kingdom, and also Gbemi Sola and Nima Shawan, associate professor, Center for Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ilorin. Gentlemen, thank you for hanging on. All right, if you can hear me, I would like to start off with you, Professor Anima Shaun, the Minister for Solid Minerals in Nigeria, in person of Dele Alake, in his New Year message, actually did say quite a number of things. I will read some of the excerpts of his message. He said the era of just cutting away our resources is over. We want to see practical plans to develop these raw materials into finished products, or plans to add value to host communities before we give out licenses to new operators. Now, this is pertinent so that the mining sector can lead the way in industrialization, create massive jobs for our teeming youth population, and also contribute substantially to economic development in the new year. He also further said that our plans is to tackle the menace of insecurity in the mining areas along the activities of illegal miners through a rejig security architecture is well on course. Now, this is what the minister actually did say. I want you to, of course, look at some of the things he said in light with the current realities that we are seeing on ground. We know that currently the administration on ground is looking at non-oil resources to generate revenue. Looking at some of the policies and, of course, actions of the minister, do you think in due course Nigeria should actually see results positively? Or this is just another political rhetoric?
Did you hear me? I said no.
Why is that?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Why is that?
Okay, now, yeah, thank you very much. Let's flash back a bit. When former governor of Ekiti State was in that ministry, that's Dr. Kayode Fayemi, he came up, or he toyed with the idea of licensing those you call the artisanal miners. That was a policy. I mean, that was a strategy or a program, if you like, Now, not a policy in any way. Then let us ask ourselves what has been done by successive ministers since he left. But the fundamental question I expect those in the academia, the civil society, and the media to be asking is this: does Nigeria have a national policy on solid mineral? Where is what was the position of the APC during their campaign on, what was their policy projection or policy plan on the solid mineral sector? It is when you look at this, or it is when you have this tangible that you can now say, okay, whatever the minister said, will have life. Other than that, it was just, you know, expressing its wishes. And I think he did call it wish at some point. If I recall some of the words in that excerpt that you read out. So
okay,
it is
I would like to
important
know.
for us
Okay.
to ask the fundamental question: do we have a national policy on solid minerals? Now, these states involved, what do they have legislation or policies in place on the management of their solid minerals that are in tandem with what the federal government is saying? I think these are areas we need to be sure we are not, that we need to be sure of, so that we are not just expressing wishes here, which I think the minister just said. Because as the minister, you ought to provide the lead. You are more or less the governor of that sector. So instead of saying we expect, I expect him to say, okay, for the next 2 years, for the next 4 years, based on this policy, these are the stakeholders, these are the plans, these are the midterm, the short-term, long-term expectations or projections that we have. But
All right.
none of that.
Okay. I'm sorry. I would like to also know
nothing
Abdul's
delivered, I'm afraid.
opinion on the statement by
I
the
agree.
minister.
I agree with Professor. My answer is no, and I'll provide different background to my answer.
Okay.
Successively in our country, when we produce ministers end up being sworn in, and they pluck policies from the air. They are not consistent with the pattern of policies in their ministry. Execute policies on the basis of where they meet, at the basis of the meeting. At the meeting point between the exit of the old minister and the new minister coming in. To answer the prof's question, yes, there's a national policy on extractive resources, solid mineral. That national policy is about 10 years or 14 years dated now. I recall when I was a delegate to the 2014 National Conference, we were given this national policy, and we were given a map of extractive resources across the length and breadth of our country. And we're told by the government that was in power then that these documents were restrictive documents, protected by the Official Secret Act. So I ask myself, why should a government enunciate a national policy, draw up maps of natural resources across the length and breadth of our country, and hide it in a file jacket or a cabinet in the office of the minister and mark it as confidential? We are talking of natural resources that belong to the people of our country, and it takes us again to the question of ownership of these natural resources. If you look at Section 1, subsection 2 of the Land Use Act, it says that all lands belongs to government, and if you extract a principle in land law, anything that is beneath the soil and is at certain height above the soil, belongs to the government. So if you say the land in Zamfara is owned by the government, it invariably means that the resources underneath the land, belongs to government. And that's the point of contention. That's the point of conflict across the length and breadth of our country. And that's why I insist that at some point in time in our history, we just have to see them devolve, decentralize not only control, but ownership of land resources in our country. If we do not do that, we will have local communities that will continue to collude with these criminals and bandits who mine resources at the backyards of our country. But going forward, I think this is important. How we tie public policy to public execution is important here. At the tail end of Buhari's government, I know attempts were made by the government to bring into form or into existence what they call the mining corps. A new body like the Nigerian Police Force, like the National Security and Civil Defense Corps and all that, charged by law charged by law to secure our national resources across the length and breadth of our country. I think that bill passed the second reading in both arms of the National Assembly, but the government ran out of its life, and the bill died. The bill died. I don't know if the creation of a new supranational security agency like the mining corps can address the problem of fighting the mining communities in our country. But if for anything, because we describe some of these areas as governed spaces, when we post security agents to those places, we will be able to plant some level of governance in this area and begin to secure our country.
All right. Now, talking about securing the country, right? A lot of this crisis that we see, unfortunately, usually have a religious or tribal coating. And for the areas that are usually affected, they're usually the hinterland, such that it's either there are topography challenges or these particular areas are difficult to locate and might take hours before you have security personnel, being deployed there, arriving there, and of course fighting the bandits and all of that. Now, there have been moves, or suggestions or even proposals by top government officials to say that why not allow some if not all Nigerians, have access to arms for self-defense. I'd like to know your opinion on the idea or issue of self-defense. An average Nigerian, going by, whatever means to acquire, arms to protect themselves. Do you think at this point in Nigeria's policy and polity, it's the way to go? I'd like to still stay on you, Abdul.
It's a desideratum for every citizen to own arms and to use arms for the purpose of self-defense. But if you ask me at the stage that we're in now, with the deep fractious fault lines we have across the length and breadth of our country, with the inorganic relationship that exists among ethnic nations in our country, I fear if we allow citizens to bear arms, to carry arms, we'll be walking into a cauldron of violence in which citizens will be turning guns on themselves. So if you ask me in a way, why in principle, I support the idea of citizens bearing arms, but the level of our development at the moment does not allow for it. So I reject it.
How about you, Professor Animashaun? Can you hear me, Professor Animashaun?
The responsibility of the state, okay. It is the responsibility of the state to protect. And the obligation, it's obligatory based on the social contract. So I would never support that citizens should bear arms. No. The state should stand up to it and be alive to its responsibility to protect the citizenry.
Now, let's look at this particular issue snowballing into neighboring countries. We know that Nigeria is, it's popularly called the giant of Africa. And of course, an issue such as this, we've seen it spill over to areas like Chad, Niger, and all of that. If this issue isn't nipped in the bud, how much of an impact do you think this will have on neighboring countries like Niger and Chad, and of course our relationship with them? I'd like to, of course, go to you, Abdul.
Well, I do not think. Look, I'll look at it the other way. Okay. We have a serious national security issue because some of the countries surrounding Nigeria are dealing with national security issues, either in the Sahel or in the Sudan region, for example. We see a breakdown of the Sudanese state, and we see South Sudan struggling to protect itself. We see Niger, where a democratic regime, quote unquote, was toppled by the military. And we see Chad that is grappling with all sorts of problems. And we see in these countries, foreign nationals or foreign entities, foreign states, pulling out of its, multilateral and bilateral security arrangement that they have with these countries, which has left Nigeria exposed. In all of these, we are not seeing the nation state, changing its national security, architecture to meet with some of these challenges. The Nigerian border between Jigawa on the northwest, the tip of the northwest, to a community in Yobe State on the northeast is about 2,419 kilometers of ungoverned spaces and desert. No wars bordering Nigeria against some of these countries. So Nigeria is a country on the go. Terrorists are coming in and coming out without checks, without control. So if we must put a handle on national security, we must look above our shoulders, see what is happening in these countries, all in an attempt to rejig our national architecture and infrastructure, all in an attempt to secure ourselves. But I'm not seeing that. In all of this too, we don't see the synergy between the security forces and agencies we have in our country. The NSA office is on its own. It's not discussing with experts like Professor Anima Shaun. It's not discussing with people in the academia. It's not synergizing with agencies in our country, and all that. All he's interested about is the bankruptcy of the nation state. That the government, the ruling party, the government before its own government has run the country aground economically. We know that the country has been run aground. What are you doing as the NSA to organize our national security agencies, put them within, a common architecture for us to deal with the internal problems we are having and protect our external borders? But we're not seeing all of this.
I'd like to also know Professor Anima Shaun's take on this, vis-a-vis all of this as it affects, countries like Niger and Togo, which, of course, I did mention earlier that many of these countries are also conduits in the transfer and sale of many of these illegally mined minerals.
The reality is that we have failed to provide leadership, with due respect, in that area, sub-regionally. And you can see, that our borders are porous, is open. Everyone can attest to that, And as my other colleague said, at this point, we need to start asking ourselves, this is the mess we are in. How do we get out of it? One thing I have seen, as you have said, is the gap between the thinkers and the doers. When I say the thinkers, I mean people in the academia or the research world, and the doers, that is those who occupy the positions, the policy makers like the NSA, So now, there's a whole gulf between us, and even the media too, So as a result of that, the actions are not informed by thinking. Which is really unfortunate. So we need to synergize, we need to reduce, we need to actually synergize. And I think when we have a coherent national security policy, I've always used any opportunity I have to say this. A national security strategy is different from a national security policy. Since 1999, Nigeria, we've had counter-terrorism strategies, national security strategies. We are yet to have a national security policy. When we have a national security policy, it will spell out in detail our roles, our obligations, who does what, when, and how.
All right.
So that we have a cohesive and well thought out plan for what to do within our border and across our borders. By that, we will be able to take care of, what I would say describe as neighborhood security around us, around our territory. And again, let me say this. This will also enable us to also domesticate, APSA, that is the African Peace and Security Architecture, which to a large extent exists only in words. Rather than domesticating APSA, many countries on the continent, especially in the Lake Chad and Sahel, we've opted for ad hoc security initiatives.
All right.
J5, short-term quick fixes, which are not going to be, sustainable.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. Abdul Mahmood, security analyst from London, and also Gbemisola Anima Shaun, associate professor, Center for Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ilorin. Once again, thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.